Radio programmers in 1967 were mostly listening closely for drug references hidden in the latest psychedelic hits, which meant plenty of songs about something else entirely managed to slip right past them completely unnoticed. A soft melody and a smooth, unbothered vocal delivery could carry almost anything straight into a family living room without anyone in the house ever stopping to really listen closely to exactly what words were actually being sung. So today, we're counting down 10 famous songs from 1967 people didn't realize were filthy. Number 10, Let's Spend the Night Together by the Rolling Stones.
Let's spend the night together.
Released in January 1967 as a double A-side single alongside the far gentler, more romantic Ruby Tuesday, this frank, unapologetically direct track became one of the most heavily censored Rolling Stones records of the entire decade, banned outright by numerous American and British radio stations alike over its blatantly explicit late-night invitation. The controversy reached its peak that same month when the band appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, and Sullivan's production team insisted Mick Jagger alter the lyrics to a far more innocuous phrase about spending time together rather than the night, a change Jagger reportedly agreed to, only reluctantly, and performed with visible irritation on live television. Despite the restrictions, the song still managed to chart respectably, reaching number 55 on the Billboard Hot 100, while its double A-side partner, Ruby Tuesday, climbed all the way to number 1 instead, largely because it faced none of the same controversy. Because the song's title alone stated its intentions so plainly and directly right from the very start, there was very little left actually hidden about it in the first place for anyone paying even the slightest attention. Yet plenty of listeners at the time still treated it as just another catchy rock single, rather than registering exactly what Jagger was asking for. The track had actually been recorded back in November 1966 during sessions for the earlier album Between the Buttons, months before its eventual single release, and grainy footage of Jagger visibly rolling his eyes while singing the sanitized replacement lyric live in front of millions of viewers has circulated among fans for decades, since as one of the entire era's most memorable, if quiet, acts of on-air rock and roll rebellion against network censorship.
Let's spend the night together now.
Number 9, Something Stupid by Nancy Sinatra and Frank Sinatra.
I know I stand in line until you think you have the time to...
Released in early 1967 as a single from Nancy Sinatra's own catalog, this soft, romantic duet became a surprise number 1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 that April, marking the only time in the chart's history that a father and daughter have ever topped the American singles chart together. Written entirely by songwriter C. Carson Parks, who had previously found modest chart success years earlier as part of a folk duo alongside his own brother, the lyrics describe a nervous suitor working up the courage to finally tell someone he loves them for the very first time, delivered with a hushed, intimate vocal performance from both Nancy and her famous father. Because Nancy and Frank were performing the material as father and daughter rather than as two strangers falling in love, the tender, almost flirtatious delivery struck many listeners as genuinely uncomfortable once they stopped to consider who was actually singing the words to whom. Frank Sinatra, already one of the biggest and most recognizable stars in American music by that point in his long career, reportedly had some real, genuine reservations about recording the song together with his own daughter for exactly this reason.
And I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like...
And the pairing has continued to quietly unsettle new listeners, discovering the song for the very first time decades later, even as the record remains one of the most successful father-daughter collaborations in music history. Nancy Sinatra has said in later interviews that she and her father approached the recording as simply another professional duet, never anticipating just how many listeners would fixate specifically on the family relationship, rather than on the performance itself, once the song became a genuine cultural phenomenon that dominated the airwaves for weeks on end. Frank Sinatra was reportedly so unfamiliar with the song beforehand that he needed the lyrics written out on cue cards during the actual recording session, a detail that adds an extra layer of irony to just how smooth and effortless the final performance ultimately sounds. The song went on to win a Grammy Award for Best Contemporary Vocal Performance by a duo or group at the following year's ceremony, and it remains, more than half a century later, the only chart-topping single ever recorded by a parent and child performing together in the entire history of the Billboard Hot 100 chart.
By saying something stupid like I love.
Number 8, Groovin' by the Young Rascals. Released in April 1967, this laid-back, Latin-tinged single became the Young Rascals' first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 that May, describing a couple spending a lazy Sunday afternoon completely alone together with nowhere else they'd rather be. The song's soft, unhurried groove and lyrics about staying in bed late and shutting out the rest of the world carried a clear undertone of physical intimacy, even though nothing in the lyrics was ever stated outright. Because the song's soft, unhurried imagery centered so heavily on leisure, sunshine, and simple relaxation, rather than anything ever stated overtly sexual, it slipped comfortably onto daytime radio playlists and even into television commercials for decades afterward without ever raising much genuine concern from nervous broadcasters worried about content. The song's success, alongside earlier hits like Good Lovin', helped the Young Rascals become one of the first white American bands to convincingly channel the sound and feel of black soul and R&B music at a moment when radio playlists were still largely segregated by genre, a blend that earned them both major commercial success and genuine respect from black artists working in similar musical territory at the time, including several well-known performers who later went on to record their own cover versions of the group's original material for their own audiences. Songwriters Felix Cavaliere and Eddie Brigati built the track around an easy, sun-drenched feeling that let listeners fill in exactly how intimate that lazy Sunday together was really meant to be, all without a single explicit word ever appearing anywhere in the finished song. The single became a defining hit of that entire summer season, staying at #1 for 4 consecutive weeks straight and helping firmly establish the Young Rascals, who would later shorten their name simply to the Rascals, as one of the most consistently reliable hit-making acts of the mid-1960s blue-eyed soul scene, coming out of the New York and New Jersey club circuit. Number 7, A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum.
We skip the light fandango.
Released in May 1967, this haunting, organ-driven single became one of the biggest hits of the entire Summer of Love, topping the UK charts for 6 consecutive weeks and reaching number 5 in the United States that same summer, even as most listeners struggled to explain what the deliberately cryptic, almost dreamlike lyrics actually meant on any given listen. The song's famous organ line drew heavily, and quite deliberately, on the melodic structure of Johann Sebastian Bach, giving the entire track a stately, almost church-like quality that stood in sharp, deliberate contrast to the far more suggestive story many scholars and critics have since come to believe the lyrics were quietly telling underneath that solemn, hymn-like surface. Music historian Klaus Johansen has argued at length in his book on the band that the lyrics describe, in coded and deliberately elaborate literary language, a drunken sexual encounter slowly unfolding over the course of one long, disorienting night, pointing specifically to the song's repeated references to 16 Vestal virgins as a veiled, indirect metaphor for lost innocence and a loss of purity that the rest of the lyrics never stayed outright.
When we call out for love, dream.
British journalist and author Tim Delisle reached a broadly similar conclusion in his own separate published analysis of the song, describing the lyrics as a portrait of seduction filtered through layers of nautical and mythological imagery rather than anything ever stated outright or plainly for the casual listener to catch. Songwriter Keith Reid has always pushed back against those readings in interviews, insisting the lyrics were never meant to describe any specific literal event, though he has also acknowledged that listeners are free to interpret the song however it resonates with them personally. Gary Brooker, who wrote the music and provided the melancholy, soulful lead vocal, later said in interviews that John Lennon told him personally that the song was his own favorite of the entire Summer of Love, a striking endorsement coming from one of the biggest stars in the world for a track whose actual meaning even its own credited songwriter has spent decades since declining to fully explain to anyone. The single sold more than 10 million copies worldwide over the years, placing it among a very small group of songs from the entire decade to reach that milestone.
Shade of pale.
Number 6, Tramp by Otis Redding and Carla Thomas. Released in the spring of 1967 as part of the duet album King and Queen, this playful, back-and-forth call and response track found Carla Thomas teasingly mocking Otis Redding as an unrefined country boy still wearing outdated clothes, while Redding fired back defensively, insisting his down-home charm and honest rural roots made him more of a genuine man than any of her more polished, city-slicker suitors. Beneath all the comedic bickering and playful mock insults traded back and forth, the song carries a clear, unmistakable undercurrent of genuine mutual attraction between the two singers, with each insult functioning more like a kind of flirtatious dare or challenge rather than a genuine put-down, a common enough device in classic soul and blues call and response tracks throughout that entire era of Southern R&B. The song reached number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 that summer and became one of the most beloved tracks from the pairing of two of Stax Records' biggest stars.
You know what, Otis?
What?
You're country.
It's all right.
Remembered fondly today as playful, good-natured banter rather than anything remotely scandalous, the King and Queen album itself became a genuine commercial success in its own right, and the pairing of Redding's raw, gospel-trained vocal power with Thomas's smoother, more polished delivery made the back-and-forth chemistry between the two singers feel completely genuine and unforced, rather than staged for effect. A quality that has kept the recording feeling fresh and alive for listeners discovering it for the very first time decades later. Tragically, Redding died in a plane crash just months after the album's release, in December 1967, making this playful duet one of the final full recordings he ever completed before his death at just 26 years old. Because the flirtation was wrapped in comedy and mock insults rather than direct language, many casual listeners simply enjoyed the back-and-forth energy without registering the courtship playing out underneath it.
You know what, Otis? I don't care what you say. You're still a tramp.
Number 5, Light My Fire by The Doors.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Released as a single in April 1967, months before it ever climbed all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that July, this now iconic single, co-written primarily by guitarist Robbie Krieger, during an early songwriting exercise the band had assigned to each individual member as practice, used the image of an uncontrollable, spreading flame as a metaphor for overwhelming physical desire, building between two people. The full album version ran well over 6 minutes long, built around an extended instrumental section featuring Ray Manzarek's distinctive keyboard basswork alongside his organ playing. But radio stations typically played a heavily edited 3-minute version that trimmed away most of the instrumental passages, while leaving the suggestive lyrics themselves fully intact for listeners. When the band performed the song live on The Ed Sullivan Show that September, one of the most watched programs on American television at the time, network producers specifically asked them beforehand to change a line referencing getting higher, fearing it was a coded reference to drug use. And Jim Morrison reportedly agreed backstage before deliberately singing the original unedited line anyway once the cameras were actually rolling on live television.
The time you hesitate is through.
A decision that reportedly banned the band from ever appearing on the show again. Because the song's central metaphor of an uncontrollable fire and burning desire felt more like sweeping, almost operatic poetic imagery than any kind of direct, explicit language, it comfortably became one of the biggest hits of the entire summer without facing anywhere near the same level of formal censorship as some of its more bluntly worded contemporaries elsewhere on this list. Jim Morrison, who wrote most of the song's lyrics himself, drew on his own background studying film and poetry at UCLA, giving the track a literary quality that helped it read as artistic expression rather than anything broadcasters felt compelled to flag. The full 7-minute album version, which opened the Doors' self-titled debut record released earlier that same year in January 1967, gave the band plenty of room to stretch out instrumentally in a way the tightly edited 3-minute radio single simply never could. And the song remains a staple of classic rock radio to this day, well over half a century after its original release first hit store shelves across the country.
Try to set the night on fire.
Number 4, Ode to Billy Joe by Bobby Gentry.
Hey, Billy Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie.
Released in July 1967 on Bobby Gentry's own debut album, this haunting, minimalist Southern Gothic ballad became an unexpected #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 that August, knocking the Beatles off the top spot in the process. Describing a rural Mississippi family's flat, almost eerily indifferent dinner conversation on the very day they casually learn a local boy named Billy Joe McAllister has jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge to his death. The lyrics never explain why Billy Joe actually died, but they do reveal in passing that the song's narrator had recently been seen throwing something off that same bridge alongside him, leaving listeners to speculate for decades afterward about exactly what the couple had thrown away together and whether the tragedy was connected to a secret pregnancy, a lost child, or simply a hidden relationship the girl's family never approved of in the first place. Gentry herself has deliberately declined over the years to confirm any single interpretation, saying in interviews that the song was really about the family's careless indifference to tragedy at the dinner table, rather than any specific mystery meant to ever be conclusively solved by listeners.
And at dinner time we stopped and walked back to the house.
The song went on to win 3 Grammy Awards that year, including Best New Artist for Gentry, and its stark, deliberately unresolved storytelling style went on to influence an entire generation of later singer-songwriters drawn to similarly ambiguous, character-driven narrative songwriting rather than straightforward, easily explained lyrics. Gentry wrote and produced much of her own material at a time when very few women in the music industry were given that kind of creative control, making her success with this single all the more notable within the broader context of the era. The ambiguity only fueled the song's already massive popularity rather than hurting it in any way, eventually inspiring a 1976 feature film starring a young Robbie Benson that offered its own definitive interpretation of the implied relationship and its taboo, largely unspoken backstory, even though Gentry herself never fully endorsed that particular Hollywood version of events as the true story behind her song.
McAllisters jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge.
Number 3, Come On Down to My Boat by Every Mother's Son.
Come on down to my boat, baby.
Released in the summer of 1967, right in the middle of what became known as the Summer of Love, this bright, endlessly catchy single became a surprise top 10 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 that August. Built around an upbeat, sunny invitation for a love interest to join the singer aboard his boat for an evening of complete privacy, far away from any prying eyes back on shore. Written by professional Brill Building-era songwriters Wes Farrell and Jerry Goldstein, both already well established in the industry by that point, the lyrics repeatedly emphasize being completely alone together, far away from land, and far away from anyone who might possibly interrupt. Language that carried an unmistakable suggestion of romantic and physical intimacy once a listener actually stopped to consider exactly what the singer was so cheerfully proposing. Because the song's arrangement leaned so heavily into a bouncy, sunshine pop sound rather than anything moody or suggestive in tone, the underlying proposition blended easily into the summer's crowded field of upbeat singles without drawing much scrutiny from radio programmers.
She sits on a dock, fishing in the water.
The band, formed by two sets of brothers from New York, never had another major hit approaching this one's success, and the song remains best remembered today as a cheerful summer single rather than the genuinely private invitation its lyrics were actually describing. Every Mother's Son had actually taken their band name from an offhand line spoken by one member's own mother during a completely unrelated conversation years earlier, and the group broke up not too long after this single's initial success, leaving Come On Down to My Boat as their single defining, if largely misunderstood, contribution to 60s pop radio and the broader summer of love that surrounded its release. The band's clean-cut image and matching stage outfits made the song's underlying suggestion feel even more surprising in hindsight, given how wholesome the group appeared on television and in magazine photo spreads at the time.
Come on down, we'll sail away.
Number 2, Cold Sweat by James Brown.
I don't care, darling.
Released as a single in July 1967 and recorded live in the studio in a single take, this stripped-down, rhythm-driven track became one of James Brown's most quietly influential recordings, topping the R&B chart that September and helping lay the essential groundwork for the entire funk genre that would go on to dominate popular music throughout the following decade. The lyrics describe an overwhelming, almost involuntary physical reaction to a particular woman's presence, with Brown repeatedly declaring he doesn't care about anything else in the world once she's near him. Language built around genuine, unfiltered physical longing and desire, rather than any of the more sentimental romantic imagery so common on pop radio at the time. Musically, the track broke sharply and deliberately from conventional song structure of the era, built almost entirely around a hypnotic, repetitive bass line and Brown's own percussive, almost shouted vocal delivery, rather than any kind of traditional melody, a stripped-back sound that let the raw physical urgency of the lyrics take center stage over everything else in the mix. Because the song leaned so heavily into pure rhythm and groove rather than any explicit or suggestive language spelled out directly,
When you kiss me.
mainstream radio embraced it fairly readily, without much real controversy at all, even as the raw physical desire at the heart of the lyrics remained fairly unmistakable to anyone paying close enough attention. Brown reportedly demanded near-total creative control over the arrangement, insisting the horn section and rhythm players lock into a tight, repetitive groove rather than following the more conventional verse-chorus structure that had defined most of his earlier hits. Musicians and critics alike have since credited Cold Sweat with essentially inventing the rhythmic template that would come to define funk music for the entire following decade and beyond it. With its heavy emphasis on the downbeat and its interlocking, syncopated rhythm section influencing everyone from Sly and the Family Stone to George Clinton's later Parliament Funkadelic Collective, and generations of hip-hop producers who eventually sampled the track decades afterward for their own very different creative purposes.
I wake up in a cold sweat.
Number 1, I Think We're Alone Now by Tommy James and the Shondells. Released in the fall of 1967 on the Roulette Records label, this driving, percussion-heavy single became one of the biggest and most enduring hits of Tommy James and the Shondells' entire career, reaching number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 that October, with lyrics describing two young lovers sneaking away from watchful, disapproving eyes to finally, at long last, be completely by themselves. The song's now famous pounding heartbeat-style drum intro, played with unusual force for a pop single of that era, along with its breathless vocal delivery, captured the nervous excitement of finally escaping parental supervision for even a few stolen minutes, with lyrics that made clear enough exactly what the couple intended to do once they finally found the privacy they had been looking for all along. Because the song was framed so squarely around the innocent thrill of teenage romance, rather than anything explicit stated directly in its actual language, it became a genuine favorite on top 40 radio stations, catering directly to teenagers, the exact audience the lyrics themselves were most directly speaking to, and quite possibly unintentionally warning nervous parents about all at the very same time.
There doesn't seem to be anyone around.
Tommy James himself has said in interviews that he never fully anticipated how the song's coy, suggestive framing would resonate so strongly across so many different generations, decades after teenagers first started calling their local radio stations to request it on repeat. The Shondells had already scored an earlier hit with Hanky Panky the previous year, but this particular single became the recording most closely associated with the band's name for the rest of their career, spawning countless cover versions across genres in the decades that followed. Decades later, the song found an entirely new audience after being covered note for note by teen pop singer Tiffany in 1987, whose own version also went on to top the Billboard Hot 100, introducing the very same story of sneaking away for privacy to a completely new generation of young listeners who likely understood exactly what the song was describing just as clearly as their own parents once had 2 decades earlier.
I think we're alone now.
10 songs that thoroughly dominated the radio throughout 1967, and 10 songs that most listeners at the time danced to or hummed along with in the car without ever fully registering just how much some of that language, or in a few particular cases, just how much genuine real-life context was quietly hiding there in plain sight the entire time. It's a reminder that a great melody and a smooth, confident vocal delivery can carry almost anything past a casual listener without them ever once stopping to notice what was actually being said. If any of these songs caught you off guard, let us know down in the comments which one surprised you the most. And if you enjoyed this look back at the sneakier side of 1960s radio, give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the music you grew up with and thought you already knew inside and out.